We are live. Not live.
Not live.
Still Holy Saturday. Awaiting life.
Even if we have no listener question, I have 2 pages just based on it. So we may not get through them all.
Welcome everybody to Live Q&A, Holy Week edition. This is Pastor and the Recovering Heretic. I am Pastor Dave.
I am Recovering Heretic Dan.
Hey Dan, how's it going?
I am. It's going really well, especially
Good.
Considering. It's a complex service today.
It is a complex service. A lot of moving parts this week.
There were. And we all came together and pulled it
Yes.
off, so it was good.
Quite flawlessly, actually. So, yes.
Yes. So a quick shout out in public to the media team.
Yes, good job media team. Your plans worked. Good job music team. Your plans worked.
Yes.
So,
Including the premiere of Jay's original composition.
yes.
It was
Very
cool. Check it out over on our other feed.
Yes.
Check out the service. You'll get all that there. All right, today.
Yep.
Cultural context.
Yes.
As I was reading through the Passion ahead of time in Mark, I saw a lot of differences, not just between Mark's Passion and John's,
Yep.
but also between how people today talk about Holy Week and leading up to Jesus' crucifixion
Yeah.
versus what it actually says in Mark. And that got me thinking,
Yeah.
how different is our modern perspective, not just over what may or may not really have happened, but also how Jesus and the apostles,
Okay.
their perspective on it would have been versus how we're looking at it now.
Yeah.
So that's what the questions are about today. And again, this is a big one. So Steve, Renee, or anybody else watching live, pop in your questions because these are just the ones that hit me, and I'm sure you have
Yep.
tons.
Or a random person on the internet. We'll accept your
Yeah,
questions too.
yeah, exactly. Because this is a big one. And to me, a super big one because really the heart of Christianity is predicated on this,
Yes.
on the Passion and the Crucifixion. If this didn't happen,
The rest of it's kind of useless.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
then we don't really need our own
Right.
religion.
Right.
So that's why I really would like to hear questions from other people too.
Yep.
But to get us started, we kind of begin Holy Week, obviously with Jesus entering Jerusalem.
Uh-huh.
And from the very outset, at least the way Mark portrays it, I got questions. Starting with, was Jesus a horse thief? Or had he arranged buying that colt in advance? Because the way Mark reads, it sounds like he just knows the colt's there, and he's telling the disciples to go in and steal it.
Right.
Right down to giving an excuse to the villagers if they ask you any questions.
The Lord needs it. That's all.
Yeah, because somehow I think if I walked into a bank and said, give me
He says
$50,000
the Lord needs it and will return it after we're done using it. So it gets borrowed. It's lightly borrowed,
Yeah, but was it knowingly borrowed?
Well,
by the
there's a
owner?
good question, right? I mean, I think Mark's implication is that this is all just part of Jesus' divine power, right? That the Messiah is never without what he needs,
Yeah. Because it kind of happens twice, right? When he actually gets to Jerusalem, then they go inside, there's the whole thing.
Right, yeah. They do it again at the Last Supper, right? Where it's like, follow this wine room guy with the water jug, tell him we need his upper room,
Yeah. Now, see, you say divineness. To me, it sounds like Jesus had this very carefully crafted
Could be.
architectural plan
The two
that he had
aren't-
put into motion.
The two aren't mutually exclusive, right?
Okay.
They could both be true, I think it's sometimes helpful to think about Holy Week as a direct action campaign, like a community organizer protest direct action campaign that turns out at first poorly and then goes in a direction nobody expects, and so if you want to think about it that way, then Jesus says the community organizer, a good direct action is always well thought out.
Yeah.
Is always well planned, for eventualities.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Mark that it really does come across that way.
Yeah.
Not like divine knowledge, but I've got paragraphs, subsections,
Right, like a good
plank points.
This comes from an author named Chad Myers, who writes a book called Binding the Strong Man, which is one of the best commentaries on Mark. But he likes to talk about the entirety of Mark this way, that Jesus is this organizing these direct action campaigns, against the powers that be.
Yeah.
You know, and so if you want to think about this week that way, you know, and Palm Sunday, that's not a bad way to think about it.
Yeah. And to me, that makes sense because he's part of a long tradition of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
He apprenticed under John, functionally.
Right. You know, John is.
And John would have taught him, here's how you do this community action.
Right. Here's how you do these disruptive actions. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. You know,
Okay.
it's a good way to think about it.
All right, I'm there. I'm with you on that. Now let's get into the cultural context
Yeah.
section. You know, he said, just tell them the Lord needs it. Would people realistically have responded to that kind of a phrase back
I have
then?
probably they'd respond about the same way people today would respond. You know,
They're like, oh,
maybe, you know, maybe not. Some people would go, okay, you know. And again, I think again, you don't have to. They aren't mutually exclusive. So if it's in that sense of the Messiah is never without what he needs, you know, just like the disciples could not resist but follow. You know, these guys could not do anything other than provide what was needed, you know.
So somebody's going to come around and
Right.
give you a colt.
Right.
Now, and this may be a cultural thing because I don't think of Jerusalem as a muddy place
Yeah.
where, you know, you think today of a gentleman taking a cloak, you know, in the Renaissance era and laying it on a puddle for a lady to cross
Yeah.
without. But in a dry environment like Jerusalem was in, why did people spread cloaks and leafy branches on the road in front of Jesus and the cloak?
Well, it's still dirty, right? You know, it's about preventing dirt, you know, so it's still dirty. And streets in the ancient world are really dirty. You know, I don't, like, even paved roads are really dirty. You got to remember they toss their waste and their trash just, like, out onto the street. You know, often. Like,
So,
you know,
I mean, you're walking through offal and dung.
right, you're
and-
walking through, right, and there's horses, right, and what do you know, if you've ever been to Mackinac Island, like, what do horses just do in the street there, like, you know, like, that's all they do, you know, so, yeah, you know,
Wow.
the streets are dirty, like, so that's why you spread stuff on, you know,
Yeah.
they're dirty.
Wow. Yeah, and I consider people were wearing open shoes, you know, like
Open
sandals.
shoes, right, you know, again, they're gross, like, yeah,
Oh, man.
yeah.
Okay, that puts a whole new context on the whole washing of the feet.
Yes, right? I mean, this is why you washed your feet, right? Because they were pretty dang gross by the time you walked into, you know, by the time you walked into somebody's house, right? And then
Wow.
you don't want to ruin the carpet. So, you know, like, got to wash your feet.
Okay. Oh, and that also then gives me an insight into the cultural customs of like Japan, where you always, and other countries too, but
You
Japan
always
is just
take
on my
off your
forefront
shoes.
now. But
Right.
yeah, you never enter a home with your shoes on.
Right. Got to remember this country was founded with modern sanitation mostly in mind, right? You know, I mean, there's very few places in this country that existed before sewer systems. You
So we
know?
never had to worry about
Right,
it.
so like we never really worried too much about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Phew. I still think it's a good idea because I'd like to go barefoot in the house. So,
Yeah. Well, yes.
You know, I don't want to be trampsing on stuff people brought in on their shoes.
Right.
I'm going to jump chronologically a bit because Steve has a question that would be later chronologically. So
Yep.
we'll pop a bit because I think it's important to get audience questions. He wants to know, did anyone in the trial of Jesus bother to stand up for him and take his side? Or was this simply a kangaroo court?
I mean, it looks pretty kangaroo court-like, you know. It looks kangaroo court-like. You know, Pilate is subtly mocking Jesus, you know, the entire time. So that probably doesn't encourage more defense, you know, and this was all, and the other part was prearranged. You know, the Sanhedrin part was prearranged by the chief priests, right? You know, so even if you're like, there are people on the Sanhedrin who are sympathetic to Jesus, right? Nicodemus from John chapter 3, Joseph of Arimathea, like those guys sit on the Sanhedrin, but you're encouraged to shut up because you know, they've prearranged this beforehand, right? So it's a kangaroo court, you know.
So nothing you say is going to make a difference anyway.
Probably not.
It might put you in a spotlight.
Right, it'll probably just open you up to being hauled off to crucifixion along with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I've got more questions about the trial. That'll be coming up.
Okay.
But I want to, I will do mine chronologically and we'll bounce for other questions.
Keep bouncing.
All right. So there, at the end of this scene of Jesus entering, there's this quick throwaway passage Mark has. So Jesus gets through the gates, then he pops up to the temple, and he looks around and leaves.
Yeah.
So what's the point of that passage? Why even include it? If he goes up, does nothing,
Because
why
we're
bother?
kind of mixing up. This is where the other gospels kind of help, right? So like we're mixing up kind of order of events a little bit, or what happens is Jesus basically, the direct action, right? Again, the community organizer analogy, right? So if you're leading, so this is called what we call a direct action. A direct action is meant to antagonize people, so.
So Jesus' goal was really to poke the pony,
right.
poke the tiger.
This is like poking people, right? So you've got this giant crowd, right? That's part one of this direct action. They march in proclaiming Hosanna. And then the direct action itself is Jesus basically occupies the temple. It's like Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
But he occupies the Temple Mount, basically. And then from the other Gospels, you get these series of challenges that the chief priests and the high counselors on the Sanhedrin are issuing to Jesus because they're trying to get him out of the temple. And this is what what they all mean by we can't arrest him in public. There'll be a riot. The riot is his crowd there has done Occupy Wall Street on the Temple Mount, and so they have to prove that he's wrong before they get him off, before they can arrest him.
Gotcha.
Right. So like in Matthew, this is where you get the thing about who do you pay taxes to, like all that kind of stuff, right? That's all meant to be this trap to prove that to give them an excuse to arrest him because he's occupying the Temple Mount. He's doing this incredibly disruptive thing.
Yeah.
So that ends up not working, but where they get him is Passover's coming, right? So everybody's got to get off the Temple Mount for Passover. It's like Christmas, Easter all rolled into one, for Jewish holidays, right?
Yeah.
And
So that's why Mark says nobody's up there.
Right, nobody's up there, right? And so, now we can arrest him because they're not occupying the Temple Mount anymore.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But that explains why Mark says that, and that's an important point.
Right. So he occupied the temple, and then Mark doesn't really go into that because Mark doesn't
much go into anything.
Right. He doesn't believe in details,
He's more the plot outline guy.
Right.
Yeah.
And my New Testament professor once described Mark as Mark was the guy from West Virginia who could hardly read or write but could tell a great story.
Yeah.
And if you just get him to write it down, it'd be a great novel, but it's hard to get him to write it down because he doesn't know how to.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of Mark. And so right. So Mark then says, okay, they go out to the suburbs basically to do the Passover thing. That's where that line is.
Okay.
So
now it makes sense. Before it was just like, I'm walking up to the temple. Nobody's here. I'm leaving.
Right. Yeah.
That's a detail I would not put
like
in a
in
novel.
Matthew and in Luke, there's like 2 whole chapters
On that.
in that verse. Basically.
All right. So knowing your author helps with some of
Right.
this
Knowing your
context.
author, like Mark just thinks none of that's useful. So
Details, who needs them?
right.
All right.
We are here to get him crucified. We don't care what he said at this point. He's here to be crucified. So
Next question. We don't, in our culture, ointment is not a big thing unless it's like,
yeah.
dare I say, medicinal. I'll put it
Right.
that way to
Yeah.
not get gross. So let's start with the uses of ointment back in ancient days, starting with what is nard? It does not sound pleasant.
It's a perfumed substance, basically. You got to remember these people don't take baths like as often as we do.
Yeah.
Right? Again, running water, difficult. Not that they don't take baths, they do, right? But like they just don't take them as often as we do.
Yeah.
So again, you've been out in these stinky streets all day,
Dung dust.
dung dust all over the place.
Yeah.
You probably yourself only have a couple change of clothes. So your tunic's probably dirty. you know, everybody, the ancient world stunk. Our, you know, like our perspective, right? And so, you know, there was a lot more use of perfumed substances, you know, that.
So functionally, we read about these ointments and stuff. Functionally, what they were doing, they were deodorants because you didn't
basically,
bathe.
yeah, right. They're deodorants. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Cover up BO.
Right.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. And that's a big important cultural point to me.
Right. Even like myrrh, right? You know, we talk about frankincense and myrrh.
Yeah.
But like myrrh is like a perfumed oil that you rub over a dead body to, you know, you're handling.
Staunch the stench of decay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, on that note, you know, they make a point about the fact that she's using this ointment before death.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming then, based on what you said, it was common. I don't want to say anoint the body, but to use these ointments before you died because it was just daily practice.
Yeah, you would use stuff like that. Yes.
But if you were dying, was there then a ritual ointment that you would use right before death?
I don't know about that.
So there may or may not be symbology.
There may or may not be. This is all about Jesus knows he's going to get crucified. So,
Yeah.
you know, everything's kind of future casting at this point, you know.
Gotcha.
So,
Or foreshadowing.
yeah, foreshadowing.
Okay.
You know.
So after death, was there a theological purpose to anointing the corpses with oils, or was it just to staunch the stench of decay?
I'm sure there was, although I don't know it. You know, I'm sure they had one, but it also served its practical purpose of normal burial practice at the time would be like the body would remain in a temporary tomb for about 3 to 4 days, and then it would be moved to its permanent place. You know, because
I would not want that job of moving a 4-day-old corpse.
Well, right. So this is what the women are coming to do on Easter morning, right? You know, it says on the 3rd day they've got to place him in a temporary spot because it's the day of preparation. It's the day before Sabbath. So they stick him in a temporary spot until they can come. Joseph of Arimathea tells the women, he's here. We've all got to do Sabbath stuff, you know.
So we got him where we need to have him
Right.
to meet ritual.
Right.
So now we can go off.
Now we go do the Sabbath. They do the Sabbath at the first opportunity they get, which is early before, you know, while it's still dark on Sunday morning. They come back to do the final stuff, and then they discover,
He's not even here.
he's not even here. He's very much alive, you know.
He's not cooperating.
Right. This is not going according to plan. So
Okay.
that's the kind of, yeah.
And that gives a whole different perspective, too. So Joseph of Arimathea's tomb was basically a staging area. It wasn't where he was supposed to end up.
It was probably meant to be a permanent tomb for like Joseph, you know, and he kind of, or even, it couldn't even, it doesn't actually say it's Joseph's tomb. It just says there was a new tomb.
So Joseph may have just made the arrangement.
Joseph may have just made the arrangement and be like, I'm commandeering this for 3 days. The dude you made it for isn't dead yet, you know.
Well, I know ossuaries were in big use then, too. So
Yeah.
was it common to really not have a permanent tomb, but you put someone there until they decayed to their bones, and then you put the bones in the ossuary?
That could be a tradition. Jews didn't do that so much, but and the Romans cremated their dead. They didn't bury them, which is why like Pompeii was such a big find. Is because we actually found Roman bodies for like one of the, you know,
Yeah.
actual Italian bodies are really rare to find from that period because they burned their dead. They cremated them, you know. So
Did that present any conflicting issues when Rome came and occupied Israel? Would that kind of, because blatant, it's hard to hide cremating a body. And would that have destroyed the purity of a neighborhood if the Romans were cremating bodies?
No, but they lived in different neighborhoods anyway, so, you know, that wasn't... I mean, this is why, like, there's all those catacombs under Rome, right? You know, it was all non-Italians, non-Romans putting their bodies in those catacombs underneath Rome that you find there, you know. The Romans didn't need them. They didn't bury, you know. But, yeah, so that's why all those catacombs are down there.
What about Christian Romans, the early Romans who converted? Did they continue with cremation?
No,
or did
they started burying their dead.
Okay.
yeah, they started burying their dead. And in fact, the Christians used to meet in the catacombs. It was one of the weird things.
They'd be down there with all the bodies. And
Yeah, very kind of gothic, black, setting.
So they're the original gods.
All these skulls all around,
Yeah.
And, yeah, they used to worship down there. It was one of the main charges the Romans level against Christians is that they're antisocial, which covers a whole host of behaviors that they find just fundamentally weird. But one of them was worshiping in the catacombs.
Yeah.
It's like, ew. Those weirdos,
Yeah, especially because, by the medieval era, it was the opposite.
Yes.
If you worshipped underground in catacombs in a hidden way, then you were evil.
Yeah, you were evil, right? Yeah, so, yes.
Oh, wow.
So, that's off topic a little bit, but yeah.
Okay. And that brings up another potential difference. Like today, cremation is accepted, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a theological reason that they stopped cremating? Roman Christians stopped cremating, or was it simply...
It starts as got to remember their mindset is Jesus is coming back now.
Like in another week, he'll be
Like
here.
in another week, like Paul actually has to tell people don't quit your jobs in 1 Thessalonians, Jesus, he might not come back that soon, like actually I got to tell people that in his letters, it's like that's how imminently they believed it was happening. So if you believe in the resurrection of the dead and you believe Jesus is coming back, burying your body or burning your body might get in the way of that. You don't know, and that
takes a lot longer to reassemble if it's just ashes.
Right, if it's just ashes, right? And that led to a kind of general, I might call it superstition of, like it'll get in the way of final resurrection or something like that, So there's that superstition, and then there is a Christian general. It's important to see the dead body. There's a general Christian bias toward. It is important to see this part of death, and not ignore it. So whether that means burying, so part of that is burying your dead, not burning them, so that they don't just disappear. I mean, in cremation, right? You don't even see it; it just gets wheeled off somewhere, and next thing you know, you got a box. And there's a general Christian bias toward burying your dead, because it's important to see the death part of it.
Yeah.
That old tradition of like the casket would be actually lowered into the grave as you did the committal is something we don't do anymore because too many accidents happen around it.
Yeah.
But it was a good tradition, because it emphasized, no, this person's dead, D-E-D, dead, kind of thing. So
That explains. Yeah, with my son, they allowed us to put the body in the creamer.
yeah, and that's a good way to do it, right? That's a better way of doing it. And this is all to say, I have no problem with cremation. I know my mom was cremated. I get it. Graves are expensive, but there is a general Christian bias towards saying the dead should be buried, not burned. For various pastoral and theological reasons.
Yeah. Well, getting back to your comment about they believed it was very imminent, the second coming.
Yeah.
It seems like we haven't gone through even a decade without somebody saying the end times are here.
Yeah.
So why is it that across our various cultures of time, everyone feels that this is the one, this is where it's ending, this is where the final times. I've got a great friend who's deeply religious, and it's like every time I get one of his newsletters for the organization he runs, it's always like, hey, watch out because it's coming. It's right here. It's right around the corner.
It could be,
But we always believe that. Why?
Yeah.
What keeps it, after 2,000 years, why would we still think it's right around the corner?
in a certain way, because you're supposed to live like it's right around, Okay, I'll say this. We are supposed to live, act, and believe as if it is right around the corner. You know, I think healthy Christianity, a mature Christian faith is a faith that comes to the point of, I expect him to return in my lifetime, even though that hasn't happened for all the other lifetimes before me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm, as my professor in seminary used to go, I'm out here looking for clouds, you know,
Yeah.
like, and I think that's a mature Christian faith position to arrive at, and one we should all arrive at, because it's only in that spirit that you live out the rest of the stuff, right? You know.
Yeah.
That said, there's a lot of people who, when they say they want the world to end or it's coming or yada yada yada, what they want a kind of final victory, right? That the world's usually doesn't grab, you know, doesn't grant them, right? Even if the revolution, whatever your revolution is, happens tomorrow, you've still got to deal with the nitty-gritty of politics. You're going to have different factions. You know, what a lot of people want is the eschaton, you know, the actual Christ coming again in beauty and power to set all to right and right all wrongs, you know, and so when a lot of people are like, oh, it's coming, that's kind of what they're longing for, you know, some kind of final victory.
I was right after all.
I was right. I'm going to be vindicated. The capitalism's destroyed, or communism's finally vanquished, or, you know, the Democrats are gone, the Republicans are gone. You know, insert whatever you want here. You know, U of M's finally been defeated forever. You know, like they'll lose for all time. You know, that kind of final victory is what people desperately, they want history to end. You know. And that's not, there is a final victory, you know, that's why that's why we expect to come back so that, and we hope that Jesus comes back and we expect him to come back so that we don't place that final victory hope other places.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so it's rightly geared, you know. Now where your friend's making the mistake is he's thinking he can decode when it's happening, which is a different thing, right? You know, living in expectation that it comes, yes. Thinking that the war in Ukraine is some ultimate sign of, or the war in Israel or Gaza or whatever is some ultimate sign of it, that's nonsense. You know, don't try and decode it like that.
And that part we have talked about before.
Yeah.
The fact that even Jesus says, look, even I don't know.
Even I don't know.
So how on earth do you think you're going to know?
Right. His comparison is it's like a thief in the night. You know, it's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
Well, this went super quickly.
Okay.
It's actually end time, our end time.
Yeah, our end
already.
time.
And I only got through three of the questions I had ready.
Yeah.
And one audience question.
We have 7 weeks of Easter. We could go through this.
I was going to say, you want to go ahead and do that? We'll just go. We'll just keep running down.
We can keep going through Easter. It's
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
All right. So, Steve, start formulating questions. I know Steve will have them. Karen, Hart, Renee, anybody else? Do you have any questions before we cut off? We're trying to going through the Passion Holy Week, what leads up to the Passion, and what it all means.
No.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you've got time to catch up because apparently we're going to do this for several weeks.
Yep. 49 days. So not next week because I'm dead exhausted next week. So.
Okay. So no Q&A next week, but after that, the week after Easter, we'll take it up again.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yep.
And thank you for being here.
Yep. Thank you. All right.
It'd just be questions with a lot of silence afterward if you weren't here. So
yeah,
it helps.
Just voicing questions into the void. All right. Thank you all. I hope